Have you ever wondered what it truly means to belong, not just to be loved, but to be chosen? Even in your messiest moments. In Austin, Texas, billionaire Jordan Ellis was drowning in silence after the loss of his wife. His mansion echoed with tantrums and broken toys because his twin boys, just 6 years old, had chased away 9 nannies in less than a year. They weren't simply difficult children. They were storms testing the strength of the only parent they had left, and Jordan was failing. Then came Grace Williams. She wasn't a therapist, or a teacher, or even someone with a polished resume. She was a maid with a quiet strength, a woman who carried discipline in her bones, but compassion in her eyes. She didn't tame the boys with punishment or bribes. She entered their chaos, reshaping it into trust. But here's the real question. When your children demand not a commander, but a teammate, would you have the courage to step down from control and step into the mud with them? This is not just a story about unruly twins. It's a story about fatherhood, grief, and the healing power of presence. Stay with us, like, share, and subscribe, because you're about to witness how one family turned storms into belonging. 9 nannies had walked out, swearing they would never return. Their shoes carried mud across the marble steps as they stormed away, shaking their heads, muttering words like impossible, and those boys are wild animals. Inside the Ellis mansion, the echoes of their departure lingered longer than their footsteps. The place was massive, 8 bedrooms, a pool that shimmered in the Texas sun, ceilings high enough to swallow sound. But what struck any visitor wasn't its size. It was the quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, suffocating, more like a museum than a home. Jordan Ellis stood in that silence, a man who seemed to carry 2 lives on his shoulders. To the world outside, he was the CEO who had fought through prejudice, the black man who had climbed boardrooms where most doors were never meant to open for him. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, looked investors in the eye, and refused to bow to the whispers that said he didn't belong. But here, inside these walls, his armor was useless. He was not the CEO anymore. He was just a father drowning. His twin sons, Ethan and Caleb, 6 years old, roared through the hallways like storms in sneakers. One slammed a bedroom door so hard the frame shook. The other tossed Lego bricks down the staircase, daring gravity to join his rebellion. Every day was a new battle, a new tantrum, another test of how far chaos could stretch before it snapped. Jordan watched them from the doorway, his hands clenched at his sides. He had lost count of how many times teachers had called, how many apologies he had rehearsed and repeated. He had stood before child psychologists, family friends, even his own mother, hearing advice he could never seem to carry out. The truth was simpler and more brutal. Since Monica, his wife, had passed away, Jordan had no map for fatherhood. She had been the gentle one, the anchor who knew when to kneel, when to whisper, when to discipline with kindness. Without her, the boys had unraveled, and so had he. He tried to make up for it the only way he knew: money. Expensive tutors, therapists, 9 different nannies with impressive resumes. None lasted longer than a few weeks. They all left with the same look in their eyes: pity for the boys, frustration with him. Jordan leaned against the doorway of the den, phone buzzing in his pocket with a board meeting reminder. He should have been preparing for another negotiation, another headline deal. Instead, he was watching Ethan throw a toy truck at his brother, listening to Caleb scream until his throat cracked. "Stop!" Jordan barked. His voice filled the room, but did nothing. Ethan kept swinging his fists, Caleb kept wailing. They didn't even look at their father. For a moment, he felt the same sting he had felt in countless boardrooms, the sense of being invisible, dismissed, as though his presence didn't matter. He swallowed hard. How could a man who had forced a seat at the table among billionaires not even command the respect of his 6-year-olds? He turned away, pressed his palms to the cool marble of the hallway. His chest ached with grief, with anger, with shame. Monica's voice came back to him like a ghost. Jordan, don't just provide. Be here. Be theirs. But he hadn't been. He had buried himself in work, thinking money could patch wounds that only presence could heal. Now, his boys were slipping further and further from him, and no nanny, no professional, no amount of wealth could close that distance. As the sound of shattering glass rang from upstairs, Ethan had thrown something again. Jordan closed his eyes. He imagined Monica's garden outside, the one she had tended with quiet devotion. Roses she had trimmed herself, herbs she had planted for her kitchen. Now it was overgrown, forgotten, a jungle of weeds and thorn. The mansion mirrored his heart, beautiful on the outside, hollow inside. He whispered to the empty hallway, a confession only the walls could hear. I don't know how to reach them. Monica, I don't know how to be what they need. And in that silence, the story of 9 nannies who had failed was just the prelude. Something or someone was about to change the rhythm of the Ellis household. Jordan Ellis had stopped believing in introductions. Every nanny had arrived at his doorstep with polished resumes, warm smiles, and promises that sounded rehearsed, and every single one had walked out, muttering the same hopeless refrain, "They can't be managed." So when Grace Williams stepped across the threshold, Jordan barely looked up from his phone. She wasn't what he expected. No crisp blazer, no overly cheerful voice, just a woman in her late 30s, hair pulled back in a simple bun, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She wore worn boots, the kind that looked like they had walked through more than suburban driveways. "Mr. Ellis," she said, her tone steady, neither deferential nor arrogant, just steady. "Thank you for meeting me." Jordan glanced up, then back to his phone. "You read the job description. I assume you know 9 people already left." Grace nodded. "I heard, and I'm not surprised." That made him pause. Most applicants bent over backward to assure him they were different, that they had the magic touch. But Grace's calm acknowledgement was something else entirely. "You're not here to talk me into hiring you," Jordan asked. "I'm not here to talk," she replied. "I'm here to see if I can help." Jordan narrowed his eyes, finally studying her face. She had the kind of expression that revealed little but suggested much. Strength without hardness, empathy without pity. He couldn't place it. But something about her stance back straight. Shoulders relaxed reminded him of people who had been trained to endure. "What makes you think you can succeed where 9 others failed?" Grace set down her bag. "I don't think it's about succeeding. I think it's about showing your boys they have a mission worth belonging to. Kids don't need another list of rules. Mr. Ellis, they need to know why they matter." The phrase caught him off guard. A mission worth belonging to. It was the kind of line Monica might have said in one of her softer, wiser moments, but hearing it from a stranger felt intrusive, almost accusatory. "My sons don't need philosophy," Jordan snapped. "They need discipline, order." Grace didn't flinch. "Discipline without belonging just feels like punishment. You can try it, but you've already seen how that works out." Her words stung, mostly because they were true. He turned away, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of his reaction. Ethan and Caleb chose that moment to thunder down the staircase, one chasing the other with a wooden sword. "Put that down," Jordan barked, stepping forward. The boys ignored him, shrieking in laughter and rage, their small feet pounding against the polished steps. Ethan swung wildly, the sword connecting with the banister. A vase trembled. Caleb shoved his brother back, nearly toppling him. Jordan's throat tightened. He imagined the headline, "CEO's son's hospitalized after domestic chaos." He reached for the sword, but Grace was faster. She stepped between them, her voice cutting through the noise like a clear bell. "Stop. Breathe." The boys froze, surprised by the sudden authority. Grace crouched to their eye level, not looming, not scolding. "You want to fight, fine, but soldiers don't fight without rules. Rule 1, look at me." Ethan hesitated, then obeyed. Caleb followed, uncertain but curious. "Rule 2, name your mission. What are you trying to win?" The twins exchanged a glance, thrown off balance. "Because if your mission is to break the house," Grace continued, "you're succeeding. But if your mission is to prove you're stronger than your brother, then you're failing. You're both strong, stronger together." Jordan watched, stunned, as the boys' breathing slowed. The sword clattered to the floor. Caleb muttered, "We weren't trying to break it." Grace nodded. "Then let's find a better mission. Tomorrow morning, backyard, 0800 hours. Be ready." The boys tilted their heads, confused but intrigued. Soldier's mission. Nobody had spoken to them like that. They didn't agree, but they didn't argue either. They simply ran off, whispering to each other about what she meant. Jordan exhaled sharply. That was the luck. "They'll be back at it in 10 minutes. "Of course they will," Grace said, standing. "Chaos doesn't vanish in a day. But now they're curious. Curiosity is a start." He wanted to dismiss her confidence, to say she was no different from the others. Yet something inside him shifted. For the first time in months, he had seen his boys stop mid-chaos without screaming or throwing. It wasn't peace, but it was something. Later that evening, after the boys had finally collapsed into uneasy sleep, Jordan found Grace in the kitchen. She was unpacking groceries. Nothing extravagant, just simple staples. Eggs, milk, bread, carrots. "I usually have everything delivered," he said. "I know, but sometimes it helps kids to see food arrive in bags, to help unpack, to know things don't just appear. Belonging starts with contribution." Her words gnawed at him. He remembered Monica kneeling on the kitchen floor with Ethan and Caleb, letting them stir pancake batter even though it splattered everywhere. He had laughed once, back when life had felt intact. Now he couldn't even recall the sound of that laugh without pain. Jordan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Tell me the truth, Ms. Williams. What makes you think you can handle this handle?" Then Grace looked him straight in the eye. "Because I've been through worse. I served 12 years in the Army. I've led people through situations you can't imagine. And I know one thing for certain: people, no matter their age, need rhythm, purpose, and belonging. Without those, even the strongest fall apart. With them, even the weakest rise." He fell silent. 12 years in the Army explained the boots, the stance, the steady tone. It also explained the quiet sadness behind her eyes. She knew about loss, about discipline, about chaos. "I'll give you a week," Jordan said finally. "1 week. If they break you, don't say I didn't warn you." Grace only smiled, small and calm. 1 week is plenty to show you a glimpse of what they're capable of. That night, Jordan lay awake longer than usual. His phone buzzed with emails from board members, journalists, investors. But he ignored them, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Grace's calm certainty was arrogance or the thing he had been waiting for all along. The next morning, the sun rose over Austin, hot and relentless. Ethan and Caleb stood in the backyard, barefoot, curious but skeptical. Jordan sipped his coffee from the deck, waiting to see what this so-called mission would be. Grace walked into the yard carrying ropes, old tires, and wooden planks. She set them down with the quiet efficiency of someone preparing for battle. The twins blinked, then laughed nervously. "What is this?" Ethan asked. "This," Grace said, tying the rope to 2 posts, "is your first mission. Operation Team Ellis. And for the first time in a long while." Jordan leaned forward, unable to look away. The backyard had never looked less like Monica's garden and more like a construction site. What had once been her sanctuary of roses and carefully trimmed hedges was now a mud-soaked obstacle course. Tires half buried in the ground. A rope stretched between 2 posts. Wooden planks nailed together in uneven shapes. Jordan nearly choked on his coffee. "She's tearing the place apart," he muttered to himself, though his eyes never left the scene. Ethan and Caleb were circling Grace like small wolves, skeptical, whispering to each other. Their bare feet pressed into the damp grass, their shirts already streaked with dirt from rolling around earlier. "All right, soldiers," Grace called out, her tone steady, measured, carrying across the yard without shouting. "Today's mission is simple. Work together, finish together. You do not leave each other behind. Do you understand?" The twins exchanged a glance, their usual competitive spark flickering between them. "What if I'm faster?" Ethan challenged. Grace didn't hesitate. "Then you slow down. A soldier without his brother is half a soldier." That silenced them, even from the deck. Jordan felt something shift. The boys weren't used to hearing discipline framed as belonging. They were used to punishments, threats, or empty bribes. This was different. Grace blew a whistle she must have kept in her pocket. 3, 2, 1, go. The boys took off, stumbling over the first set of tires, laughing and shouting. Ethan pushed ahead, but when Caleb tripped, Grace's voice cut through the chaos. "Mission incomplete unless you finish together." Ethan froze. His usual instinct would have been to leave Caleb behind, to win at all costs. Instead, he doubled back, grabbed his brother's hand, and yanked him up. Together, they scrambled forward, slipping, sliding, until they collapsed in the mud, both giggling in a way Jordan hadn't heard in months. From the deck, he gripped his coffee cup so tightly his knuckles whitened. The sound of their laughter was like a language he had forgotten. For so long, the mansion had been filled only with shouting, tantrums, or silence so heavy it pressed on his chest. Now, hearing their joy, even messy and loud, was almost unbearable. Grace clapped her hands. "Good. Now salute your commander." The twins looked up at her, grinning, then snapped their muddy hands to their foreheads. "Yes." Ma'am Grace crouched down, scooping a lump of wet clay from the ground. She molded it quickly, scratched 2 words into it with a stick, and handed it to the boys. Together they carried it to the deck, faces glowing with pride. Team Ellis, the words read, crooked and uneven. Jordan stared at the clay medal, speechless. Ethan shoved it into his hands. "For you, Dad. You're the commander." His throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught behind the weight of grief and guilt. He simply nodded, pressing the metal against his chest. The boys didn't seem to notice his silence. They were already back in the mud, waiting for Grace's next command. That evening, when the boys finally collapsed into bed, still streaked with dirt and proudly clutching their ribbons of effort Grace had tied around their wrists, Jordan lingered outside their door. He watched Grace tuck them in with a firmness that was neither too soft nor too harsh. She whispered something he couldn't hear, and the boys nodded like cadets receiving orders. Downstairs, Jordan confronted her. "What exactly are you doing to them?" Grace poured herself a glass of water. "I'm giving them rhythm, safety, respect, team. Children thrive when they know where they belong." Jordan scoffed. "That's not parenting. That's training. Training is not the opposite of love," Grace replied calmly. "Training is structure, and structure, combined with belonging, becomes love they can feel." Her words unsettled him. For years, he had believed love was what you provided. A roof, food, money, safety. But what Grace suggested was that love wasn't just provision. It was presence, rhythm, consistency. And he wasn't sure he had any of that left to give. The next morning, he found Grace kneeling by a child-height whiteboard in the kitchen. Written in bold marker were 3 words: safety, respect, team. Ethan clutched the marker, tongue sticking out as he scrawled his crooked name beneath the words. Caleb waited his turn, bouncing on his toes. When he finally added his name, letters backward but proud, Grace smiled. Good. Now the mission log begins. By the end of the day, the board had been filled with crooked handwriting and stick figures. Shows by the door, hands washed, spills cleaned, each small act logged, celebrated not with candy or toys, but with strips of ribbon tied around their wrists. That night, Jordan saw his sons sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding their wrists up to each other, showing off their ribbons like medals of honor. They weren't fighting, they weren't screaming, they were laughing, leaning against each other. For the first time in years, Jordan didn't feel like an outsider in his own house. He stood in the doorway, clutching the clay medal in his pocket, and wondered if Grace might actually be right. Yet his pride and grief tangled inside him. He couldn't forget the board meetings, the investors, the colleagues who had doubted him for being a black man in a space where they thought he didn't belong. He had spent his whole life proving he could control chaos. And here, with his own sons, he was powerless while a maid, a stranger, seemed to command the respect he couldn't earn. That night he tossed in bed, staring at the ceiling. Monica's voice haunted him again. "Be here, Jordan. Don't just provide." The next afternoon, chaos returned. Ethan shoved Caleb hard enough to make him fall. Caleb burst into angry tears, fists clenched. Jordan braced himself for the usual explosion screams, slammed doors, hours of sulking. But Grace stepped in. She knelt between them, boots planted firm. "Breathe," she commanded. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Slowly. The boys' sobs eased, their breaths matching her rhythm. She brought out a beat-up box labeled Recon and Repair. Inside were scraps of wood, glue, tape. She set it on the table. "Fix the bridge," she told them. The boys frowned, resistant. But Grace began quietly, gluing 2 pieces together. Ethan finally joined, then Caleb, wiping away tears. As their hands worked, she spoke softly. "Courage means saying sorry before someone else does." Jordan watched from the doorway as Ethan froze, then whispered, "I'm sorry I pushed you," Caleb muttered back. "It's okay. Just don't do it again." No applause followed. No lecture. The lesson was carved in silence, in the steady rebuilding of a wooden bridge and the one between them. Later. Jordan found a note on the kitchen counter in Grace's handwriting. Conflict is training material, not shame material. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet, right behind Monica's photo. For the first time in months, hope no longer felt like a distant stranger. It was in the mud, in the ribbons, in the crooked handwriting of two boys learning to belong. By the end of the week, the Ellis mansion no longer felt like the hollow palace it once was. There was still chaos mud tracked through the kitchen, scattered shoes, noisy laughter, but the chaos had rhythm now, and rhythm. Jordan was beginning to realize was its own kind of peace. Grace had introduced what she called the daily briefing every morning at precisely 7:30. Ethan and Caleb gathered at the small whiteboard in the kitchen. They stood like cadets in pajama pants, rubbing sleep from their eyes, waiting for instructions. Grace, with her calm authority, would write down 3 mission shoes by the door, hands washed before meals, and 1 act of kindness to be logged before bedtime. At first, Jordan found it amusing. He leaned against the doorway, sipping coffee, watching his boys salute and shout, "Yes, ma'am," with exaggerated seriousness. But amusement turned into something deeper when he noticed what wasn't happening. There were no screaming matches over cereal, no tantrums about brushing teeth. The boys had traded chaos for a strange kind of order, an order they seemed to embrace willingly, not out of fear, but out of pride. One evening, after a long day, Jordan found the whiteboard filled with stick figures and crooked words. Ethan had drawn himself helping Caleb tie a shoelace. Caleb had scribbled, "I said sorry," beneath it all. The words safety, respect, team stood like pillars. Jordan touched the board lightly, feeling something inside him crack. He remembered Monica's handwriting on sticky notes she used to leave around the house. Don't forget milk. Smile at the boys today. Slow down. He used to roll his eyes, too busy to notice. Now he would have given anything to find one more note waiting for him. Grace must have sensed his heaviness. That night, as she tidied the kitchen, she spoke quietly. "You know, Mr. Ellis, belonging doesn't erase grief, but it gives grief a place to breathe." Jordan stared at her, unsettled by how easily she seemed to read him. "You talk like you've lived this before." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "I lost my husband overseas. The Army teaches you how to keep moving, but it doesn't teach you how to sit with silence. I had to learn that on my own. And I know your boys aren't just unruly. They're grieving, too. Chaos is just their language for pain." The words struck like a blow. Jordan had spent months blaming his sons, or himself, or the nannies who walked out, but he had never named their tantrums for what they were, grief, raw and unshaped. A few days later, that truth revealed itself in a way Jordan couldn't ignore. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind that drummed against the windows and made the whole house feel smaller. Caleb wandered into the music room where the grand piano sat untouched. On top of it, a silver-framed photo of Monica gathered dust. Her smile was frozen in time, the way she had been before sickness hollowed her cheeks. Caleb's small fingers brushed the frame. Jordan, entering behind him, felt his chest seize. Instinct rose like a command. Don't touch that. For months, he had treated Monica's belongings like sacred relics, untouchable. But before he could speak, Grace knelt beside Caleb. "What do you feel when you see her?" she asked softly. Caleb pressed his forehead against the piano lid, silent but heavy with meaning. Ethan hovered in the doorway. unsure whether to join or retreat. Grace didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she wiped the dust from the frame and placed cardstock and markers in front of the boys. "Let's make something for her," she suggested. "Together." They scrawled the word Mom in crooked letters, adding a green heart. They taped it to the back of the frame. No lectures, no sermons, just a ritual, small and sacred. Jordan stood frozen in the doorway. His throat tightened until it hurt. For the first time in over a year, his sons weren't forbidden to remember their mother, they were invited to. And that simple act did what no therapist had managed to soften the grief into belonging. That night, Jordan sat alone in the living room. He turned the photo frame over in his hands, staring at the boy's handwriting, crooked, uneven, honest. He didn't cry, but he didn't turn away either. For once, he simply looked. The following weekend, Grace raised the stakes. Operation Trust Bridge, she announced at breakfast, her eyes glinting with quiet determination. Ethan and Caleb cheered, bouncing in their seats. Jordan frowned. "And what exactly is Operation Trust Bridge you'll see?" Grace replied. "In the backyard." She had built a new course, ropes, puddles, chalk-marked paths, and at the center, a wooden plank balanced over a shallow pit of mud. "This mission," she explained, "is not just for Ethan and Caleb. It's for their father, too." Jordan blinked. "Excuse me," the twins shouted in unison. "Your turn." "Dad." He froze. Him out there, crawling under ropes, stumbling over tires, rolling in mud. He was a CEO, not a cadet. His instinct screamed to decline, to laugh it off, to retreat into dignity. But something stronger tugged at him, his son's expectant eyes. With a nervous laugh, he kicked off his shoes, rolled his pant legs, and stepped onto the course. The boys erupted in cheers. Grace clicked her stopwatch. "On the clock. Mr. Ellis, let's see what you've got." Jordan crawled awkwardly under the ropes, splashed through puddles, stumbled over tires. His movements were clumsy, unpolished, but his son's laughter pulled him forward. By the time he reached the plank over the mud, his heart was pounding, not from exertion, but from fear. Fear of failing in front of them, fear of not being enough. The plank wobbled beneath his weight. He froze, breath caught. "Come on, Dad," Ethan shouted. "It's okay if you fall," Caleb added. "We all fall." Jordan's throat tightened. He stepped forward and slipped. With a loud splash, he landed flat on his back in the mud. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the air. Then Ethan and Caleb erupted into laughter, collapsing on the ground, giggling until tears rolled down their cheeks. Jordan's own laughter joined theirs, loud, unrestrained, real. For the first time in months, it wasn't forced or polite. It was the laughter of a man who had fallen and discovered that falling wasn't the end, it was belonging. The boys leapt onto him, smearing mud across his face, hugging him tighter than they had in years. Grace clicked her stopwatch, arms folded, a faint smile breaking her composure. "Mission complete," she declared. Jordan met her eyes, chest heaving, mud dripping down his face. And for the first time since Monica's death, he felt like he wasn't standing apart. He was inside the circle with his sons, with their laughter, with their dirt-streaked joy. That night, as he tucked Ethan and Caleb into bed, Jordan noticed the shift. The mansion no longer felt like a museum haunted by silence. It felt alive, messy, imperfect, warm. The boys pressed their clay medals into his hands, whispering, "Team Ellis," and for the first time, Jordan believed them. The laughter from Operation Trust Bridge lingered in the walls of the Ellis mansion for days. Jordan noticed it in small ways. Caleb humming to himself while brushing his teeth. Ethan drawing stick figures of the three of them on scraps of paper. For the first time in a long while, the air in the house carried something lighter than grief. But grief is never gone. It waits. One evening, after dinner, Ethan and Caleb sat at the kitchen table with Grace. Sketching in their mission log, Jordan wandered past, glancing at their drawings, muddy stick figures, arrows pointing to crooked bridges, and a list of rules in jagged handwriting. At the bottom, Caleb had scrawled one word that stopped him cold mom. Jordan's hand tightened on the back of a chair. The word pierced through him, dragging him back to Monica's final days. The hospital smell, the quiet beeping of machines, the way she had whispered, barely able to breathe, "Promise me you'll be there for them." He had promised, and then he had failed. Later that night, as the boys drifted to sleep, Jordan sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. His phone buzzed with an email from his board urgent, demanding his presence at an upcoming investor dinner. A part of him wanted to welcome the distraction. Business was familiar. Business was controllable. Family was not. But then he remembered the way Caleb's tiny fingers had touched the photo of Monica on the piano, and how Grace had invited them to remember instead of shutting them down. His sons didn't need him in another boardroom. They needed him here, in the messy, uncomfortable space of their grief. The test came sooner than he expected. It was a stormy Saturday morning. The rain beat hard against the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. Grace had given the boys a quiet mission for the day, build something together out of blocks. But as often happened, cooperation dissolved into competition. Ethan wanted a tower. Caleb wanted a bridge. Voices rose. Blocks scattered. Finally, Ethan shoved his brother hard enough that Caleb stumbled back and burst into tears. Jordan was in the hallway when it happened, his body tensed, ready to storm in, ready to shout, ready to unleash the same old frustration. But he hesitated, remembering Grace's words. Conflict is training material, not shame material. Grace stepped into the room before he could. She crouched between the boys, raising her hand. Breathe. Her voice was firm but steady, like stone in a storm. The boys trembled, faces red with anger, but they inhaled, exhaled, slowly. Their sobs softened. Grace pulled the familiar box from the shelf, recon and repair. She set it on the floor. The mission is not to win. The mission is to rebuild. Inside were scraps of wood, bits of cloth, glue, and tape. She began quietly piecing them together, and eventually the boys joined. Ethan wiped his face on his sleeve, gluing 2 small beams. Caleb sniffled, pressing tape down with trembling fingers. As their hands worked, Grace spoke gently. Courage means saying sorry before someone else does. Jordan leaned against the doorframe, heart heavy. He had spent months trying to command obedience. Grace was teaching them responsibility and reconciliation. Ethan finally whispered, "I'm sorry I pushed you." Caleb mumbled back, "It's okay. Just don't do it again." When the bridge of wood and tape finally stood, it wasn't pretty, but it stood, and so did they. That night, Jordan found a small card on the kitchen counter. In Grace's sharp handwriting, it read, "Conflict doesn't break families. Silence does." He folded it carefully and slid it into his wallet, right behind Monica's photo. Days later, another challenge arrived, this time from outside their home. A call came from Ms. Whitmore, the boys' teacher. Her voice was weary. "Mr. Ellis, we need to talk. Ethan and Caleb are disruptive. Again, Jordan felt shame burn his chest. He was used to walking into boardrooms with confidence, but walking into his son's school always felt like stepping onto a battlefield where he was already losing. When the day of the meeting arrived, he almost went alone, but Grace insisted on coming. If we're building a team, we face challenges as a team, she said. They sat across from Mr. Whitmore, who listed every infraction: pushing, shouting, disrupting lessons. Jordan shrank in his seat, already rehearsing an apology. But Grace leaned forward calmly. "May I share something?" From her phone. She showed photos of the obstacle course. Ethan helping Caleb over the wall, Caleb waiting patiently at the finish line. Then she slid 3 index cards across the desk, hand-drawn by the boys themselves. A stopwatch, a crooked sign that read, "Respect Guarantee," a Captain of the Week badge. Her proposal was simple: rotate leadership in class. Use the same timer system. Give the boys responsibility instead of labels. Ms. Whitmore hesitated. That sounds unorthodox. Before she could object, Caleb pulled the small kitchen timer from his pocket. He set it on the desk, clicked it, and turned to his brother. "Beep." "Your turn." Ethan nodded, stacking books from the shelf. "Beep. My turn." They moved with quiet precision. No arguing, no shouting. The room fell silent. For the first time, their teacher didn't see troublemakers. She saw teammates. Jordan's throat tightened. Gratitude swelled in his chest, raw and unexpected. As they walked back to the car, he turned to Grace. "I thought it would be another apology meeting, but you gave them a language to grow in." Grace shrugged, her eyes steady. "You trusted me." That was step 1. For Jordan, it wasn't just his sons who were learning to rebuild. It was him, too. That evening, he sat on the porch, listening to the rain soften into a drizzle. Ethan and Caleb were inside, drawing in their mission log. Grace was tidying the kitchen, her movements steady, unhurried. He pulled Monica's photo from his wallet, staring at her smile. For the first time since she passed, he didn't feel only the ache of absence. He felt the beginnings of something else: hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. He whispered into the quiet night, not sure if the words were prayer, confession, or promise. "I'm here. Monica, I'm finally here." The call came on a Sunday afternoon. Jordan had just stepped into his office to glance at a contract when Grace's voice echoed up the stairs. Sharp and urgent. "Mr. Ellis." "The boys are gone." He froze, the papers slipping from his hand. "Gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "They left a note," Grace said, holding up a scrap of paper scrawled with marker. "Mission in the woods." Jordan's stomach clenched. His sons had always been reckless, but this was different. The woods stretched for miles beyond the back fence. He pictured them wandering through mud and briars, vulnerable to snakes, to strangers, to storms. Panic surged through him like fire. He and Grace ran to the backyard. The gate was ajar, muddy footprints leading out. Jordan's breath came fast, sharp. He had walked into countless boardrooms under pressure. But this was nothing like that. This was his sons, his blood. "Split up?" he asked, his voice shaking. "No," Grace said firmly. "We stay together. We'll cover more ground if we move smart." She pointed to the trail. "Look at the direction of the prints. They're sticking close to each other. They want to be found." Jordan's chest pounded. "Or they want to prove they don't need me." Grace glanced at him. "Either way, you'll show them you're here." They pushed into the woods. The trees swallowed the light. damp earth soft under their feet. Jordan's mind raced with guilt. Had he pushed them too hard, not hard enough? Had his grief blinded him so badly that his sons thought they had to test him to know if he cared? Branches whipped against his arms as they followed the path. Every sound made him flinch: the crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Memories of Monica rose unbidden, her laughter on family hikes, the way she carried snacks in her backpack, her gentle scolding when the boys strayed too far. "Ethan, Caleb," he shouted, his voice breaking. The woods answered only with silence. Minutes stretched like hours. His breaths came ragged, panic scraping at his chest. What if he failed them again? What if this time failure was final? Then Grace touched his arm. She pointed to a broken branch. They came this way. They followed, hearts pounding, until at last they spotted two small figures sitting on a fallen log. Ethan and Caleb, their sneakers caked in mud, their faces pale but determined. Jordan stumbled forward, relief and anger colliding inside him. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. Ethan lifted his chin. "It was a mission," Caleb added softly, "to see if you'd come." The words pierced Jordan deeper than any insult he'd ever heard in his career. He sank to his knees in front of them, mud soaking through his jeans. "You don't have to test me," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm not leaving. Ever." The boys stared at him, wide-eyed. He reached for them, pulling them into his arms. For the first time, they didn't resist. They collapsed against him, muddy hands clutching his shirt, tears soaking into his chest. Behind them, Grace stood silently, her arms crossed. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes softened. Jordan pressed his forehead to his son's hair. "I know I haven't been here. I know I failed. But I'm done running. I'm here, right here, and I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, they stayed like that, a tangled knot of grief and love and mud. The woods were quiet except for the sound of their breathing. "Finally," Ethan whispered, "promise." Jordan kissed the top of his head. "Promise." They walked back together, hand in hand, Grace trailing just behind. By the time they reached the backyard, the sky had begun to clear, sunlight breaking through the trees. Back inside, the house felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but steadier, as if something had shifted. The test had been passed, not with perfection, but with presence. That evening, Jordan tucked his sons into bed. Caleb clutched his stuffed bear. Ethan leaned against his shoulder, heavier than usual, as though the day had drained him. Dad Ethan murmured, "Yes, you got mud in your hair." Jordan laughed, surprised by the sound. "Guess I did." Caleb smiled sleepily. "That means you're part of the team." Jordan swallowed hard, his chest aching with both pain and joy. "Yeah," he whispered, "part of the team." After they drifted off, Jordan stepped into the hallway, where Grace waited. "They weren't just testing themselves," she said quietly. "They were testing you. And you showed up." Jordan nodded, his throat tight. "I almost didn't. But I did." Grace gave a small, approving nod. "That's what matters. Not that you never fall, but that you keep showing up." Jordan leaned against the wall, exhausted. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel like it was crumbling around him. It felt like it was slowly, painfully, becoming something else, not perfect, but real. The morning of the twins' 6th birthday dawned cool and golden. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the Ellis mansion, touching the polished floors with warmth. Yet the house didn't feel like the echoing museum it once was. It hummed with a different kind of energy, quiet but alive. Jordan woke before the boys. He stood at the edge of their shared room, watching them breathe in unison. For the first time in years, he let himself linger in that silence. He used to avoid these moments, fearing what they might remind him of Monica's absence, his own failures. But today, he stayed. Today, he wanted to witness. Downstairs, Grace had been busy. She hadn't brought balloons or clowns. Instead, she had stretched long ribbons from the front gate to the backyard, clipped with photographs and note cards. Each ribbon fluttered lightly in the breeze, creating a path of memory. When Ethan and Caleb awoke and saw it, their eyes widened. "What's all this?" Ethan whispered. Grace smiled, her voice steady. "Your mission, cadets, is to walk this path together. Stop at each station, read what's written, do what it asks. Finish as a team." The boys scrambled into their sneakers, saluting her with solemn grins. Jordan followed behind, his heart tight, unsure whether to watch or join. At the first station, a photo showed the muddy obstacle course from weeks ago. On the note card, in Grace's sharp handwriting, it read, "Name something you're proud of." Ethan puffed his chest. "I didn't cry when I fell." Caleb bit his lip, then whispered, "I helped Ethan when he was scared." Jordan's throat tightened. Grace nodded. Both worth medals. They moved on, stopping at another photo, the broken wooden train bridge. The card read, "Thank someone." The twins turned immediately to Grace. "Thank you for helping us fix stuff," Caleb said. Ethan added, "even the stuff inside us." Grace's composure cracked for a second. She blinked hard, saluted them briskly, then stepped back. At the third station, a classroom photo was pinned. The card read, "Promise something for the year ahead." "I'll listen better," Ethan said. "I'll wait my turn," Caleb added, his voice soft but sure. By the time they reached the backyard, Jordan's chest ached with emotion. At the end of the path stood a wooden table. On it lay their clay medals, polished and strung with navy ribbons, and a deep blue notebook. On the first page, in bold strokes, were 3 words: ritual, purpose, belonging. Grace handed the notebook to the twins. They turned to their father. "Dad, your turn now." Jordan froze. His instinct was to retreat, to let them have this moment without him. But something in Ethan's tone left no room for escape. It wasn't an invitation. It was an expectation. He stepped forward, his hands trembling. He picked up the pen, leaned over the page, and wrote 3 names in careful strokes: Jordan, Ethan, Caleb. Then, after a long pause, he added 2 more words: Team Ellis. The boys' faces lit up. Grace let out a laugh, covering her mouth. The twins pounced on her, wrapping their arms around her legs. "That's not protocol." She laughed, stumbling sideways. Jordan watched, his heart breaking and mending at once. He stepped closer, extended his hand toward her. Just one word left his lips, carrying everything he couldn't articulate: "Stay." Grace looked at him, really looked. No performance, no guarded professionalism, only recognition that this was no longer a job. This was a place. She clasped his hand. "I wasn't going anywhere." Behind them, the boys shouted for a team photo. Ethan fumbled with the camera, counting down with glee. In the frame that followed, 4 figures stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a crooked banner the twins had painted in childish strokes. It read, Ellis. No filters, no edits, just a family, messy, imperfect, but whole. As evening fell, the banner swayed gently in the backyard breeze, carrying the name Ellis like a flag of victory. Jordan lingered on the porch, listening to his son's laughter inside. For the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. He realized what Grace had been teaching all along. Children don't just need rules. They need rhythm. They don't thrive on control. They flourish when they belong to something greater than themselves. It wasn't about medals or obstacle courses or even the notebook. It was about presence showing up, staying in the mess, not above it. For years, Jordan had tried to buy peace with toys, tutors, and timeouts, but what his boys needed most was a father willing to fall in the mud, laugh in the chaos, and rise as part of their team. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Jordan sat alone in the living room. He stared at the crooked banner, its letters uneven but proud. For the first time since Monica's death, he felt something more powerful than grief. He felt belonging. He thought about the boardrooms, the deals, the corporate empires. None of it mattered if he couldn't win here, in the quiet battlefield of his own home. He closed his eyes, whispering a vow not to his shareholders, but to the two boys sleeping upstairs. I'm here. I'm staying. We're a team. And maybe that was the real victory, not perfection, not wealth, but the choice to remain, to keep showing up, to belong together. The story of Jordan Ellis and his sons is not just about a grieving father or unruly children. It is a reminder of something far deeper. Life often tempts us to retreat when pain feels unbearable, to hide behind work, wealth, or silence. Yet what children, families, and even communities need most is not perfection, but presence. The Ellis family discovered that true belonging is built in the mess, in muddy laughter, in quiet rituals of trust and repair. For older generations, this lesson resonates even more strongly. We all carry scars, regrets, or moments when we think we failed those we love. But it is never too late to step back in, to choose patience instead of anger, to show up instead of withdrawing. Healing doesn't come through control or grand gestures. It comes through small, consistent acts of love and courage. The message is simple, but profound. Families are not stitched together by flawless rules, but by the daily choice to stay, to listen, and to laugh even after we fall. That is how dignity is restored, and how hope quietly returns, even after loss. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, please give it a like. Share it with someone who might need hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world and helps us bring more meaningful stories to life.